everyone attending and those who are viewing the video later on. Welcome to another installment episode of Consent Dojo. We are, wow, going into a second year soon, and has it been? Yeah, it has been quite a few already. And about Consent Dojo, every month I invite amazing human beings to discuss the nuances and the challenges, complexities on consent. Sometimes consent is treated as if it's just easy, like just say yes, just say no, but it's so much more complicated. And originally, I started talking about consent around the issues of sexuality and kink, but consent is an everyday matter. And by the time we think about, if we wait to think about consent for when we're in the playroom or the bedroom, we will not have had chance to practice and build up our consent muscles. Thus the Consent Dojo name, because we need to practice all the time, from the simplest to the more complex, and always, always the foundations are useful and necessary. Okay? I do not teach consent because I don't think I'm qualified to teach consent. However, I'm here to facilitate conversations and learn right along with all y'all who are viewing. And I would like to introduce to you my dear, dear, dear friend and comrade and chosen family and amazing artist and social practice make shit happen person. So I am delighted to have you here. Jason, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Midori, for having me here today on Consent Dojo. I am a social practice artist living and creating and loving in Yulamu, also known as San Francisco. I have been in this fabulous place for over 26 years. I've lost track of count. It's been a long time. And I make work that explores the cosmic mysteries. And I do that through a variety of different ways. Sometimes that's through performance. Sometimes that's through curating shows. Sometimes that's through fully immersive participatory installations in a gallery called Black and White Projects here in San Francisco, curated by Rhiannon Evans McFadgen. Wherever I go and whatever I create, consent is actually a huge part of what I engage with, because I feel as a former youth media person, media artist, where you have to get signed consent forms to record people, it's always been a question that I've had to ask in terms of my practice. Let me see. I also specifically, you can find me at queerlycomplex.com. It's a business I run. I do creative coaching. Specifically, I focus on artists and creative entrepreneurs and helping you problem solve or find new ways to think about what you do or make. And then I also do change management and peer-based praxis consulting with my dear friend, Crystal Mason, and a variety of other things, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
All right, so social practice.
Yes.
You best explain that.
Social practice to me, as someone that's been using the term now for a while, and someone I want to state is not formally trained. I never went to art school. I never graduated college. So social practice was and is something that I heard used a couple of different ways, and I've taken to mean work that gets made in community. For me, it means deep community. A lot of the communities that I make and create with, I have deep relations to. It is using participation, for me, using participation as material in order to create ways to reorient ourselves to the cosmos. That's why I say I dabble in the cosmic mysteries now. I realize I help people see their worldview differently. And social practice for me is using my body, using the environment around me, using people and conversation and values and consent to make the work.
And there's a lot of different ways that people engage in creating under the big umbrella of social practice. So for those of you who are viewing, if you encounter somebody who is engaging in social practice, ask them what they mean by it, because it's really fascinating.
It has so many different meanings, and I probably am not doing it justice in terms of art speak, but it's how I've understood it in my own lived experience.
Yeah, I remember when I bumped into that, and I actually was through your introduction around social practice. I was like, whoa, the clouds parted, and I'm like, oh, that's what I do. There's a name for what I do. Oh my God.
Well, it's how we met.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
All right, so art. Okay, we're not talking about kink and sex and consent right now. So, all right, let me be devil's advocate, which I will be quite often today.
Great.
Well, if it's consent in sex and kink, obvious, but why in art? Why would it matter if I'm going to choose to go? I go to a museum, I go to a show, and what the hell does that have to do with consent and the one creating it, other than me buying a ticket to go see you?
So, great question. I think a couple of different things, and it's easiest for me to talk in my own practice because that's where it shows up the most. So I often ask people to make something with me. And in that process of asking people to make something with me, I am moving from them coming to witness art to them being the art. And I feel like very much in sex, where there is a boundary between two beings who are trying to make, create, fuck, whatever, that there is a reason for us to offer an opportunity for consent in that act of creation, because art is an act of creation. And if I'm asking someone to step from passive viewer into active art and art maker, then I feel like I have a duty as the one asking the audience to make that transition if they consent to doing and being that thing. I don't know. Again, maybe this comes from a media background. I did a lot of media work with young folks before this. I also worked running case management programs in schools where consent is incredibly important, and understanding the legalities of consent is necessary when you're talking about children, youth, and their families, and their academics and mental health records. So for me, it's very important within the process of creation to ask the person you're creating with if they want to do it or not.
I want to paint a concrete picture here, because you're doing a unique new project with that you recently were telling me about at the Hate Street Fair. So folks can get a sense of this. This isn't a theater where I'm buying a ticket and sitting in a seat and waiting for the curtains to go up. Paint a picture for us about the location, the context, and if I were in attendance, what I would be seeing and experiencing.
Great. So live chaos poetry, which is what I did at Hate Street Fair, and it was a fabulous thing. Hate Street Fair is a beautiful festival all down Hate Street here in San Francisco, where the Summer of Love was born. And so it's in that legacy. There's lots of hippies, there's lots of rainbows, there's lots of people. And it was the first time Hate Street Fair has been back. since COVID, and it was in a different month, October. Normally it's in June. Normally it's my birthday weekend. This time it was my husband's birthday weekend. How funny. It was swapped from one birthday to the next. But yeah, so it happened in October. And I am part of a group of artists that has been working with the fair thanks to Andrea Fuenzalida. So there were a number of us. I think there were about 8 of us that were occupying about 4 booths total of space. And we had people who were live painting down on one end. Those are my friends, Keegan and Donna and Victoria. They were all live painting. And then there was my friend, Andrea, who has these incredibly wonderful handmade voodoo kitties. She also does miniature paint, like smaller paintings, some bigger paintings. Then there was my friend Steve, who had his booth all set up with metal prints and postcards. My dear friend Ash was doing tarot readings and had queer, trans, non-binary zines, things of the different flags, color up poem zines. Then there was me, and then there was some clothing retailers to my left. And so when I had originally booked Haight Street Fair, I thought I would be vending similar to everyone else. You know, you think about a fair like this as a place where you just kind of vend stuff. And I realized I wanted a way to like actually engage with people. I like hearing people's lives, and people often just want to talk to me. I get spoken to often on the bus or out in the world. People just naturally are attracted to me and have conversation with me. So what I did is I got a big sandwich board and I said, only $10 live chaos poetry on the sandwich board in white and neon pink. Those are 2 of my favorite colors against black, as you can see. And then I had a soapbox, So I stood on the soapbox. And as I stood on the soapbox, I invited people to come up and check out what is live chaos poetry. And when they did, I invited them into a process. And I asked them if they would consent to having a conversation with me. And they would normally say yes. Often they would say yes. I can even show you the form. I have it with me right here. One second. I kept it close just in case. This is the form right here. So I asked, do you consent to having a conversation with me? Yes or no? Yes, great. Would you like that conversation to be about sex, love, power, or money? And then they would have to choose one of those conversations. And then I asked, do you consent to me taking notes during our conversation? Yes or no? They say yes. Do you consent to me transforming your responses into a poem? Do you consent to me sharing this poem publicly? Do you consent to me remixing and reusing this poem for other pursuits? And those are the questions that I asked them to consent to. And then because what I'm making is a poem from a conversation, I'm having a conversation with someone. So I asked them to share with me a name that they want me to use publicly. Because some people don't want their given name used publicly. Some people want a pseudonym used. And I'm like, okay, great, but you can give me any name you want, but it's a conversation. This is a conversational poem, so it has to be associated to another person. And then I have them acknowledge that the poem itself is theirs. These are all their words. But that authorship belongs to both me and to them. Even though it's their words, I helped author the poem. And that no one is owed any recompense, financial or otherwise, beyond the exchange of the offering of the poem made on the specific date at Haight Street Fair. So again, just being really clear that we are engaged in some sort of energetic exchange here. And then I interview them. And from there, I take notes. I took all these notes. And this one is Nikki. She chose sex, and this is her poem. This freak fair of lavenders and periwinkles and magentas. Ooh, I'm getting flushed. Breathe into the dual orgasm. I fucking love it all.
So, okay, I love the spoken consent form. Now, again, devil's advocate here. Hey, it's a street fair. Can't you just stand on the soapbox and, kind of bark or like just get people talking to you? Why, what does this step do in making art?
One, by making it fun, actually, because people are, it's an unexpected request. I want to acknowledge that it's an unexpected request. Because it's an unexpected request, it really changes and shifts my conversation with people. When I go and have a conversation with them after the consent form, they have to sign it too. In addition to the verbal consent, they sign a consent form. People go deeper. Their guard is down a little bit more. They feel more at ease. They know what it is that they're getting into. They know how the conversation is going to be used. They can more freely share or guard themselves based on what they want to actually say, knowing that I'm going to use this stuff publicly, and maybe you don't want it to say something because it's going to be used publicly. We all have things that we don't necessarily want to be revealed to other people. And there is a lot of creation, especially in social media, where consent isn't given for the remixing or reusing of work. So if I can invite a process of, hey, maybe we actually should be asking, and maybe we should be more free in saying yes. Maybe it actually, all it takes is just saying yes. But asking and getting a yes is a much more pleasurable experience than later on having someone come up to you and be like, why the hell did you do that? I feel violated.
Yeah, and this is really interesting as sampling and mixing and creating art from various other production has become commonplace. Now, I have a proposal and I would like to ask a consent of you because I didn't discuss this with you before and it just popped into my head. Would you be up for doing this online right now with one of the participants?
Yes, I would. And let me get my new topics, because those are the topics I had for Hate Street Fair.
Oh, you have new topics.
I have new topics.
Okay. And I took the liberty of asking the crowd attending if somebody would like to step up. And I do have an individual who said that they would be honored to do so.
Great.
Yeah.
Let me get a pen. I do not have a pen.
And while you're doing that, let me have a side conversation here with the volunteer. To the volunteer person, do you want to be present by voice or by video? And I will. Okay, and please make sure your video is off and let us know by what name you would like to be known. I'm going to promote you to panelist now. Let's make sure your video is off. Okay. Testing, testing. And I am going to
I needed to grab
ask
the.
you to, I'm, okay. To the guest. How shall you be known by?
I think Alan is fine. Thank you.
Hi, Alan.
Hi, Jason. I love your consent form.
Oh,
It
thank
is
you.
awesome.
Thank you, thank you.
I also really liked your response to Midori's question. It is an interesting variant on the theme of enthusiastic consent is hot. And your associating consent with pleasure, I thought was just really spot on.
Oh, thank you. Well, are you ready to begin?
I think so, yes.
Great. Do you consent to having a conversation with me?
I do.
All right, so I have some topics and I will put them in chat. These are my new topics. So you can also see them, but I will say them aloud. Would you like it to be about love, beauty, death, grief, rage, joy, pleasure, power, desire, or money?
Gosh, I have to pick one?
You have to pick one.
Oh my gosh. I think I will pick beauty.
Great. Beauty it is. Please describe how you arrived here in this space today. What paths or people brought you here?
So I have known of and known Midori casually at a distance for many years. I live on the East Coast, and I have been privileged to take workshops and classes that she offered when she traveled to the East for various fairs and events. I only recently learned of the Patreon and joined immediately. I learned of the Patreon because she had a conversation with Joe Z, whose name I probably should not say fully, who is also a longtime friend of mine. And I happened to share a social space with Joe. He posted about the conversation. I went and listened, and I'm like, oh my gosh, she has a Patreon. I have to do that immediately. So I have attended a couple of consent dojos before, and I was particularly fascinated by the topic of this one. So I wanted to make special effort to attend.
Lovely. Thank you for sharing. A couple more questions for you about consent.
Mm-hmm.
Do you consent to me taking notes during our conversation?
I do.
Do you consent to me transforming your responses into a poem?
I do.
Do you consent to me sharing this poem publicly?
I do.
Do you consent to me remixing and reusing this poem for other pursuits?
I do.
Great. Do you acknowledge that this poem is yours?
It hasn't been created yet, which is so it's a little bit hard to acknowledge that, but I understand your intent and I acknowledge your intent in this way. Is that sufficient?
That is perfect. Thank you. It will end up being composed by me and it will belong to both of us in the end. And what name would you like me to use publicly?
Alan.
Helen, great. So I want you to just get comfortable for a moment. And I want you to sit and ponder beauty. Ponder what it looks like. Ponder its smells. Ponder its touches, its pleasures, its delights. Ponder beauty in totality. Please describe any colors, sensations, metaphors you ascribe to beauty.
The colors that come to me first are the colors of people's skins, the rainbow of humanity. And the idea that people are beautiful in many ways and shapes and forms. And the second thing that comes to me for color is the green of natural growing grasses, trees, the forest, and the idea that the green growing things express life, which I find beautiful.
Please describe when you first became aware of or experienced beauty.
I have a particular childhood memory that sticks in my mind of a holiday when my parents gave me a small area rug to be put by the side of my bed so that in the winter I would put my feet on a rug rather than on the cold floor as I got out of bed. And the rug was some kind of 1776 memorabilia. So it was in the colors and shapes of that Revolutionary War type drum. It was very red with yellow that represented the rope that tied the top and bottom onto the drum, and then white on the end where it represented the drum head. And if my memory is correct, and it was 1776 era, then I was probably not quite a teenager.
Thank you. Next, please take a moment and dream of beauty. Imagine all of the places beauty takes you. Please describe your dreams, longings, or even more remembrances.
The dream is a dream about human contact. It begins with mental images of my wife and my girlfriend, both of whom I find very beautiful. And in the dream, I touch them and they touch me. It's like a touch on the shoulder, a hug, an embrace. And then in the dream, I pass from one person to the next. And in the dream, there are other people, some of whom are no longer with us. And when I remember them, I try to remember their beauty and not focus on the fact that they're not here anymore. And it's hard because there are people I really wish I could hug today, and I can't. I suppose that's sort of circular in the sense that beauty and sadness are often connected, at least in my experience.
I want to Thank you, Ellen, for sharing and for being vulnerable and sharing these intimate, deeply intimate stories with me. And I now ask for a moment to compose a poem. All right, I have it. Beauty by Alan. The colors of greens and reds, of the shades of people's skins, of grasses tall and lush. The dream of touch and memories, of passing one to the other, then back again, of holidays where feet are warm, and the sadness that lingers from loss that makes it all beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. would it be possible to get a copy of the poem?
If you give me a moment, yes, I will actually even put it in chat for people really fast. Let me throw this right here, and I'm going to just type it really quick.
And while Jason is typing that, Alan, thank you. I'm curious about, oh, and Alan, if you do want to share your email with Jason, you can do so through the chat, or I can pass it on later, either way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, Alan, as to how the process felt for you.
Wow, a lot of feelings. It didn't feel one particular way. I am a neuroatypical person, and as a result of that, I tend to overthink and be very analytical. And so there was a conscious effort not to overthink things and to attempt to be clear and honest. That was hard. And I am of an age where more people than I know have passed than I would care to admit, and recalling some of them is definitely sad. And trying to hold on to the beauty that was those people is important to me. So I'm really glad to work at that and to sort of focus on that beauty.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think for all of us, it's to be present and feeling is hella hard. If I may ask further questions, and you know, I can also take you off the panelist if you wish. I'm curious of what the act of consent, you feel that the act of consent and the conversation around setting the consent at the beginning contributed to this chaos poem experience for you.
I think for me, it was very much like the thing that I said to you, Jason, at the beginning, which is that I really try to practice enthusiastic consent, try to live that way. And Jason, the way, as I said, you connected consent to joy and to happiness, I thought that really, that opened a door for me. I think that helped me be more honest and open.
Thank you. It's nice to get this little bit of feedback as well. You know, I noticed, you know, just in the conversations I had at Hate Street Fair, specifically around love, and I ended up having conversations with a lot of who I perceived as straight men. It might be wrong of that perception, but they were with their families. So that's the perception there from the street. And they started talking about their love, the love that they, after the act of consent, and we started talking about first memories of love, they really opened up to me about the memories of their first loves being love with men, and the platonic love of men. And to me, that was very, it was a gift to receive, just like it was a gift to receive your stories here tonight. And I hope I did the honor of your words justice in this poem tonight. Because I feel very fortunate that people take a leap of faith and try something out with a stranger. So thank you for that. It's not always easy.
I will say that you come with very good references when Midori described you as chosen family. I can only imagine what that, how high a bar it is to get into that circle.
Hey, Alan. Uh, I'm happy to put you back in the audience. I also want to know if Jason has any, if you have any questions for Jason or Jason has any questions for you.
I'm happy to answer questions. I should say I consent to answering questions. I guess my question for you, Jason, as an artist, comes from the idea that much of good art is shocking or surprising. And I'm wondering how you align this idea of consenting to art when, in many cases, the artist wants not to reveal beforehand what the person might be consenting to.
That's a great question. I don't mind shock as a person. I don't mind going into shocking experiences. I think I've just had enough experience with a diversity of people to realize that I don't need that shock to be the thing that makes meaning. I need the audience turning into the artist to be the thing that makes meaning. A good way of describing this is art isn't this poem that I wrote here tonight. Art is the conversation that we had that made the poem possible. The poem is just a poem. So I'm not as much worried about the final product, so to speak, as much as I am the journey it takes for us to make meaning of life together. That's art. And I think we've conflated art to be product. And that's a nature of the way art was commodified by the Catholic Church. It is the way that art is continued to be commodified as a means of wealth generation among an elite group of people. It is the ways in which art continues to be devalued and segmented off as only fine arts and not as actually the process of meaning making. Because if we understand it as really truly the process of meaning making, then art should be in every classroom, it should be in every subject matter. It actually, yes, it has its own thing, but art actually should be the way that we're helping make meaning and understanding of the world for all subjects.
Okay. I see what you're saying, I think, but I want to ask if I can circle back to what you said at the beginning. If the conversation we had is art, what is not art?
Not art is me sitting and binging my favorite show and not thinking too critically about it. Whether that be RuPaul's Drag Race, whether that be The Witcher, whether that be, you know what I mean? Like, whatever it is, those things that I just consume to be able to turn off my brain so that I can just relax at the end of the day. It is things that make me not have to think too hard, and I'm okay with that. I think that there's a place for that. So it's not about demeaning that. I just don't think that that is necessarily art in my experience. Art is the thing that helps me understand where I am in the world. Now, if I watch a great TV show that makes me question my world, then the act of questioning the world is what's made that art for me. That could be a great TV show. For some people it is. Some people, it helps them like process different aspects of their lives. They like fantasy, and fantasy makes them think differently about the world. Great. then you're engaged in a process of art and art making. But I think what we've just conflated entertainment for art, we've conflated things, and those are things that we need. I'm not saying those are things that we don't need. I'm just saying that we've conflated them with art.
Would it be okay to continue this line of questioning or discussion?
I invite you. I do want to read a comment from the chat that somebody said, art, for quote, for me, art equal creation, not art equal destruction, unquote. And yes, Alan, I invite you to continue. I'm finding this fascinating.
Okay. So you went in a different direction than I thought you were going, which I found really, really interesting. And thank you for sharing your thought process. I thought at first you were talking about the difference between interaction and solo. So in the sense that you and I had a conversation, it was art, there was this interaction, this transaction that occurred between us, and that made art. And then you talked about by yourself binging these shows, and that was not art. But then you went to this idea about art being the thing that helps you make sense of your place in the world. Did I quote you correctly on that? Cool. Which I love. That's a great description. But it makes me want to go back to the concept that I've been struggling with ever since I saw the topic of this dojo, which is this idea that part of, or at least there's certainly a part of art that relies on the ability to transgress, to shock people out of their sensibilities, to make them question their daily assumptions in order to learn more things. I think, for example, of a fashion exhibit I saw some years ago in a museum, which used an image altering mirror, right? So you would walk in front of a mirror and it would alter your apparent clothing, your visible gender markers, other such things. There was no warning that it would present you with this image of yourself. But at the same time, I watched people's reactions to it, and it was very profound, right? So a man who had never considered themselves in a female presenting way would be suddenly confronted with a female looking image of themselves, but still recognizably their face or whatever. And I thought that was very interesting. I was wondering what you might think of something like that.
I think to each their own. That's not the art I would make. I think if I were to do something like that, I would want a process of consent and play around how people see themselves. I think that there is value in the shock. I go to museums, I go and see shocking work. I like being an audience in that arena. I don't like making in that arena. And there's a difference there. I don't find it pleasurable to shock someone. And I want my creative process to bring pleasure and joy for people. So I don't want to do that. I did a whole immersive installation that was incredibly overwhelming called Be Jason, where I invited people in to be me. And if you want to talk about shock value, it had the shock value in that it was completely overwhelming for people to like actually come into that space and ask to literally be me through a mapping process, through a doll making process, through poetry, through trying on my clothes, through I had wafers. I was raised Catholic, so I had Catholic communion wafers and I had stenciled my body on them, and people could literally eat me. So there was a huge amount of immersiveness in that installation that would be considered shocking. But on the door was a specific request for consent. Sorry, 1 second, getting a delivery at an inopportune time.
Zoom life. And while the delivery is happening, I continue to invite questions. And if anyone else wants to step up and be a chaos poetry collaborator with Jason, I welcome that. Or we just continue this great conversation. And Alan, I am totally welcoming having you in as a in this conversation, just think that we're just pulling up some tea and having a good conversation. So
I've loved the conversations.
Well, thank you.
Uh,
You're both very kind.
so yeah, so there was a request for consent on the door, and often people missed it, and I would have to go back and invite them back to look at it and sign it. And it was interesting because the people that did sign it, see the door, walk in, sign the thing, and then walked in, had a different experience than those that walked right past the door and into the room. And then they would be met with this like incredibly overwhelming experience. Often they would make some sort of snide remark, and then they would leave. And it was something I watched, and I so happened, there's this thing called Open Studios here in the city, San Francisco, that happens in the fall, and my installation happened to coincide with Open Studios, but I was in a gallery, I wasn't in a studio. And so I got a lot of people thinking that they were just coming into someone's studio and not into an actual gallery that was a fully immersive experience. And I got a lot of really rude comments as a result of that, which was I found fascinating. But when it was people coming in for the full experience and actually going through the process of consent making, they actually contributed more to the making of the space. They actually wanted to engage with the work. They wanted to think more critically about not just what they were doing, but who they were in the space. And ultimately, that's what I want. I want you to think differently about your worldview, and maybe I can help you through that process. But ultimately, you still have to think differently about your world. I'm myself, and that's all I am.
Thank you. May I shift topics and ask you a different question?
oh, let me read from the side here briefly.
Okay.
And I quote from a guest, quote, I think you can ask for consent and still do something shocking or surprising. You can ask someone if they're open to feeling surprised or shocked. You can also ask if somebody has any triggers, unquote. And I want to comment into that as somebody who has made art that shocks and has done performances fully intending to destabilize. And I was reflecting on this and like, okay, so my background's like 90s club scene and like Torture Garden in London. And in that case, people are paying money to hang out in a freaky performance environment. And I suppose that's consent because they're going in, not like a walking the sidewalk, right? So I suppose that's an act of consent because all the advertisement shows some pretty intense stuff.
And I would say the stuff that I've noticed of you, Midori, kind of bringing it back to the practices that I've seen of yours and that we've created together, you still find a way to bring in consent now because you're not in the same situation as Torture Garden. Do you know what I'm saying? Like when you think about the different places where you've done some of your stuff, like when you're thinking about all of the smashing that you did to build, all of the smashing of the ceramics and stuff to build the one table, everyone came with their own stuff to smash and throw. And that was a process of actually consensually releasing our rage, at a particular moment in time. When you've done your clown piece, I was your attendant and I had to like prep people to come in so they kind of knew what they were expecting. So I think that there's a way in which you brought consent in, into at least all the pieces I've seen of yours, that have been more participatory and beg a disorienting of the world simultaneously. It's a softer ask than mine. Do you know what I'm saying? Like mine's a very structured. Again, I come from media. So I have a way of thinking about things. I come from media and case management.
I was also thinking of art and consent when the artist is asking for consenting participation and and people don't engage in that. So for example, Felix Gonzalez Torres, and rest in power, amazing artist. And I'll put references in, and perhaps the moderator can put a little reference to Felix Gonzalez Torres. There's one sculpture installation where it's a pile of wrapped hard candy, and it's the weight of the hard candy, and this is at the Chicago Art Institute, is the weight of his partner's body. And we're each asked to take a candy if we wish, as part of the generosity, even as the symbolic weight of his lover is diminished, and his lover died of HIV. There's that. Then there's also the pile of paper that he had. And where was that exhibit? I can't remember. A pile of paper, and there's an instruction that says, take a piece of the paper. And I think the quantity and the measurement had something to do also with his lover's body. And in the middle of this museum, everybody's like walking by looking at a weird pile of statue or a weird pile of candy, and being hyper respectful of being in this white wall box institution and not actually reading it. So I recently in Chicago, I would go up and take a candy, and I'm eating it. And I took a candy, and I also took it out of the pile and took a photo while laying on the ground. Also uncommon behavior. With the pile of paper, everybody's walking by, not really paying attention. The big, beautiful gallery, right? Lots of open space. I take a piece of paper, I sit down on the floor, and slowly, with precise movement, I start making an origami crane. At first, people are literally tripping over me because they're just walking through and I guess not paying attention. They're literally tripping over me, and they're about to say, hey, and then they realize I'm doing a thing. Then they wonder if I'm a performance artist. All the while, the security guard is off in the corner, just arms crossed, watching this, right? And I just keep making slowly folding. And then a couple of people are like, what's going on? And then they go and read the sign where it says, please take a piece of paper. And somebody else starts to sit down, starts folding. Somebody else sat down, starts folding. And eventually there's a whole bunch of people folding. So once I very slowly finished that one crane, I put it and then left. And as I passed the security guard, she's like, and I went my way around the museum and came back. And then there's a whole mess of people. And I saw this father and two single-digit children sitting, making the little origami boats.
That's cute.
That was so much fun. Oh my God. Here was a case where the deceased artist in the artist statement specifically asked for action, and it was not taken up because people, one, didn't read it, or two, were too conditioned to how to behave in a museum. And a museum, especially ones you have to pay for, has that gatekeeping barrier, etiquette, and so forth. So I found
So you made the art piece the art in that
Yeah.
instance, actually.
Yeah. And that was a fascinating experience. So I bounce it back to Alan's question. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. Jason, if you don't mind, I would love to hear your story about how consent came to be so central to your artistic practice.
Great question. Content warning, I had my consent violated when I was younger. And so it's always been at the forefront of my mind as something that should be talked about. I came out at 18. My process of coming out was a world-shattering process, I think, as most queers are. I mean, I came out in 94. I was in seminary to be a priest. I experienced a lot of unconsent. I was thrown out of seminary because I caught the head of the seminary cruising for sex in the bathroom of the public university. That is all a part of my coming out story. And after that, I found a radical group of people of color that had my back again in 94, 95. So suddenly coming out got tied directly to racial justice at the Catholic university that I was at, and not in any insignificant way. Like literally, I was able to stay at the university because my friend at the time, Stacy, a Black guy, and my friend Lorena, a Mexican student, had my back and found me a job at the university and got me to be a residence hall advisor somehow, which literally saved my ability to stay in university for one more year until finally they kicked me out. And as a result of that radicalization, I got involved with a lot of queer movements that weren't necessarily at my Catholic university. And it got me into conversations about radical sex and consent. And so it's always been present in my life from a very young age. And I think I have found ways to bring it in, out from just the conversation of sex and sexuality and the bedroom, and really thinking about all of the places where there might need to be a little bit more consent than there currently is. And for me as an artist, and specifically as a queer artist, how can I find weird places to do this, you know, on things that people aren't expecting? You know, I did a 3 or 4 hour durational performance in the window of Artist Television Access here in San Francisco that took confessions of times people caused harm or violence. Right after the election of Trump, later that month, like 2 weeks later, I was taking people's confessions about times that they've harmed people and transforming them into small lines of poetry that were given back to them. And so this confessional, they were behind a curtain and they had to speak into a microphone in order for me to get their confession. And as a result of speaking into a microphone, I put their audio through a vocoder, a system where it like changed their modulation. I worked with a sound artist to do all of this. I could not replicate it myself. But had them do this process where it really obscured it and then delayed it for about 15 minutes and then reprojected people's confessions on the outside of the window. And that process for me was, again, really important to have consent in that process because people were literally telling me times of harm and violence. And I was trying to transmute it into something else. And I know it was an incredibly profound experience for a couple of people who revealed that they were in the room afterwards. So I don't know, I think it's always been something that has been important to me. And, you know, I'm in a monogamous married relationship. So, you know, the consent we play here at the house is not the same. So I've been finding ways to bring consent and conversations of consent into other areas.
Well, thank you for that story. I appreciate that. I would like your consent to ask you a difficult question.
Certainly.
Okay. I cannot help but notice the sign over your shoulder.
Yes.
I would love to hear your thoughts on the relationship of consent and an organization that made its name by, among other things, violating the consent of closeted gay people and forcing them out, outing them against their will, often to the detriment of their lives and careers, because their actions as publicly closeted people was doing harm. And a little bit of background, if I may. You may be able to tell from my picture, I've been around a while. So I argued with people in ACT UP about this behavior in the late 80s. And I'm curious, very curious to hear your take on it and why you feature an ACT UP sign so prominently.
I feature an ACT UP sign so prominently because young folks made that from Rise Youth Center here in Richmond, California. And Rise Youth Center is a youth center that I have been involved with since before they ever opened their doors, which is, they've been open for, I want to say 11 or 12 years. So it is an organization that is near and dear to my heart. It inspires me that our young folks find inspiration and actions from history and want to recreate the language and messaging that comes from our forebears. Does that necessarily equate to do all those tactics make sense today? I'm unsure. I think that we are in a time of political unrest and extremism that is ever growing. And I think that having a little bit of fire under our asses, having a little bit of provocation is a good thing. Does it mean that, does it mean that I am going to be the one doing the provocation? Probably not. Does it mean that I am going to disregard the actions of people that have made a different calculation than me because they understand their lives depend on it differently than mine does? And my answer to that question is, I don't think so. I think there is space in this world right now for us to have a more complicated worldview than one that is everything needs to be the way that I see the world. I'm very confident in the way that I approach the world. I've not always been, so this confidence is kind of weirdly new. But it's come with a desire to not minimize the worldviews of others. And it doesn't mean that I have to always agree. And it does mean that sometimes those worldviews are going to be at odds with me. And I, just truth be told, I really don't listen to TERFs. Just truth be told, I don't really listen to fascists, So there are certain lines in the sand for me where it's like, yeah, I'm not really going to talk to you. But if we're going to be engaged in this kind of experience of meaning making of the world, I've been able to do it with people that I never thought, and I've had really incredible experiences. I'm cool with that.
Thank you. Midori, I would like your consent to ask both of you a tough question.
Okay, and I might set a boundary. We'll see.
That's very good. Boundaries are always acceptable. I would love to hear you speak, each of you, from your different perspectives on what you think about the differences that are brought to consent by marginalized identities. Each of you belongs to different communities and you have intersecting identities. And my sense as a white male person with his own identities is that marginalized identities change the view of consent. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that topic.
Ooh, wow. Letting the hamsters in my brain run a little faster now. Jason, want to take this one? I will also think on this. Yeah.
I think any lived experience that puts you at odds with the system of domination gives you a different worldview. As a result of that different worldview, everything is different. And I think there's been a lot of assumptions we make about people's worldviews and where they're coming from that I don't think are always fair of other people or of the complexity with which that they see the world. I think our politics has allowed for a lot of black and white because that is the thing that makes our economy run. But I don't think it is helpful to actually understanding people and people's motivations and how people experience the world. Because if you, in any way, shape, or form, have a lived experience that has been oppressed and suppressed by a system of domination that has extended generations, whether that be Indigenous folks or Black folks, whether that be immigrants, whether that be queer and trans folks, whether that be disabled folks, whether that be poor folks. I think that we have a different relationship to words and ideas and concepts than, yeah.
Okay, so my thoughts, I'm gonna go super personal. Okay, so contemplating your question, as you know, I like being middle-aged because it gives me a good perspective as to how I have lived experience, things I've fucked up, things I didn't realize at the moment. It's good to be middle-aged. I realized that I have subconsciously or conditioned to think that I have less arena in which my consent matters. For example, okay, growing up as a mixed kid in Japan, I had this idea that I had to answer anyone's query about who I am and what I am. That it was somehow instilled in those that are other in Japan that it is our job to make the world okay for the majority, and I don't get to say, no, I don't have to answer that question. It was that I had to answer the question. So that was shaving away. So it wasn't even shaving away. It was like I had less than like the straight Japanese guy, because that's the dominant ethnicity there. Also as a girl child in Japan, or women in Japan, having one's body felt up on a crowded train was considered our shame, and we were to silently endure it, right? So it was as if the realm of consent was much smaller. As an adult, and now Japanese American woman, as I'm teaching my class Forte Femme, my women's dominance weekend intensive, which I'm looking forward to restarting sometime next year, I do this exercise where I ask for a volunteer with consent from the audience, and I have her standing in the middle of the room and just kind of feel to her ordinariness. And then I would come in from the periphery of her vision, and I ask her to tell me when to stop when I have reached the end of her. Where is the end of you? So I'm coming in from the periphery. And at that point, usually she'll say, stop when I'm right at her skin. Then I back up and say, all right, think about your most awesomest day of whatever their most awesomest day was, right? And to feel a sphere of her awesomeness, like a sphere all around, going through the floor, going through the ceiling, and to really feel it. And then I come in from the periphery, and she is to tell me to stop. Stop. So thinking about the end of me, I think that many of us marginalized or in some way told not the dominant power, the end of me has been made smaller. And I've had to work to make the end of me bigger. And boy, that pisses some people off. And that, I think, is tied into consent. So there's my thought.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Jason, thoughts on my thing around consent?
I would say for folks that are systemically and culturally suppressed and oppressed, that consent is the first thing that is always violated, and it will constantly be violated because it is how you keep people in their place. And so the question of, do we have a different relationship to consent is yes, because not all of us experience being on the other end of that. There are times that I've been, there are definitely times that I've not been. And it's false for me to claim that I've been on the other side of that. I've had personal experiences that have put it there, but I've not necessarily had systemic experiences in the same way. And so thinking in that way, what I'm hearing from you, Midori, is there is a system of domination and control that wants to keep women in their place, and it will do everything in its power to wrest consent from people. It's why Roe v. Wade was overturned. It's why we're looking at everything that we're looking at right now in so many different places. It is about clawing away at the ability for people to have autonomy. It's what we did to Indigenous people. It's what we did to Black folks. It's what we continue to do to a lot of people these days. And so for me, I think that's another reason why it's so important to find ways to bring it in, because if we can have experiences that challenge us to think about what is consent and why haven't we been given consent in certain regards, it may make more people question, well, maybe we should have consent in more places, hopefully.
I have a question for the two of you and anyone else in the live participation, live guest room there. I was just thinking about, I don't know why it flashed into my mind. What was it? Oh, it was because of the conference I was at recently. I went to the Asian American Art Initiative down at Stanford, and I noticed that the majority of the attendees appeared to be women presenting. Anyhow, they didn't give us enough breaks, but when they did, we all rushed to the bathroom. Okay. Long line in the room with the skirt symbol, and no line in the room with the pants symbol. And I was looking over and thinking about doing the usual nightclub thing of just, going over to the other bathroom. And I do. When there's a ridiculous line and I know that there's a stall, because I'm not set up to use a urinal, I don't have the actual accessories for that. And by the way, y'all, you can actually buy accessories to stand and pee for those of us who aren't aligned for standing and peeing without making a mess of your clothing. So if there's a stall, I'll go in there. Am I violating a consent on space?
Great question.
I think that question was also addressed to me. Is that correct?
Sure, and anyone else listening live.
So I would say yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in part because I help organize an event that takes place in a hotel space where the bathrooms are binary gendered, and we have a number of attendees who are non-binary. And so one of the things that we do with pre-arrangement of the hotel is we change the signage on many of the bathrooms. And initially, we changed the signage on all of the bathrooms. And we heard from attendees of several genders that made them feel uncomfortable, that they wanted the option to go into a bathroom that was an assigned gender that they felt compatible with, and to know that people who also felt compatible with that gender would be present there and not other people. And so we have changed our practice to where some of the bathrooms are all gender, but some are left as single gendered. And in an environment where the bathroom was labeled single gendered and people had not consented to have all genders in there, that's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I remember a restaurant years ago, and this was I think 20 years ago in Europe, so it was way ahead of us over here in the US. The bathroom was signed standing and sitting. And there was like a row of sink in the middle. I liked the standing and the sitting. That just made it so much easier for me. But yeah, I think I'm going to carry around that question about the bathroom thing. I also feel when I do that, I feel more than a wee bit transgressive as I'm weeing.
Well, as Jason said, transgression can be good, right?
It can. Transgression is sometimes necessary as well, in instances like the nightclub that didn't have women's bathrooms, or like the Eagle.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So we have like a couple of minutes. Alan, thank you. I am going to return you to the audience.
Nice
And
to chat with you, Alan. Thank you so much for everything today.
I remain honored and very pleased. Thank you so much.
Jason, wow,
Yeah,
conversation.
this is lovely.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing your personal background around consent on this. So much to think about.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I like figuring it out. Thank
Yeah.
you for inviting me to this. I like talking about it.
And having an opportunity for people to see how you work.
Yes.
Because I've been curious about how you engage the verbal real-time consent. That's not the classic.
Yeah. Media release form where you're like, what am I really signing? Which was also the thing for me, media release forms, they're so legalese that it's hard to like really understand what it is that you're signing. So I've been trying to figure out how a lawyer might not love me, but I've been trying to figure out how do I have better conversations with people.
When I've had to sign media releases, appearing on as talking head or expert in some show or another, I have to sign big old releases. And I'll be honest, I kind of scan it and just sign it. And I always feel like somewhere I'm being tricked.
Yes.
Like some way or another, I am working against my own well-being. And it's, yeah. And I've often had situations with like art venues where there are situations where I, in all good faith, I've contributed my artwork, art labor, and then in the end feeling screwed because I didn't put in a detail. I think we've talked about situations like this.
Yeah.
And that I didn't cover possibilities. And I end up kicking myself because I thought that the other would be in good faith because they come from the same community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So art and consent also between the culture worker and the venue.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad non-consent in the art world as well, let's be honest. Yes, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of usage where that's questionable or yeah. I've found myself in sticky situations, which is also why I'm like, let me think more about if I'm asking something of someone, how do I not replicate the crappy situations and conditions I've been in?
Yeah. And this feeling of having been taken advantage of and feeling a fool.
Mm-hmm.
And then uh there are people who have said to these situations to me that, oh, you should have known better.
That's never helpful.
Never helpful. Let me read from the comment here.
Great.
Somebody said, working at a music festival, I altered the gender symbol to Prince's symbol on the shower stalls because they had made the ones with a bench and hooks, which are also closer to the water heater, men's, and the ones without and further away, women's. Equal access for all. Oh my God, access to hot water. All right. So Jason, before I wrap up,
Yes.
closing thoughts, or it would be lovely if there were some sort of thought or exercise that viewers can take away or engage in their own life.
Thought or exercise. Well, more of a, for lack of a better word, challenge. Where in your life might you be able to insert, do you consent to something that might be unexpected? Do you consent to having a conversation is a good one, about a topic? Because people sometimes like it and it will be awkward and people are like, well, why are you asking me that? And then that's a conversation in and of itself. So is there a way that you can insert a request for consent somewhere that it might not necessarily show up?
Good one.
There you go.
On that beautiful thought exercise, Jason, thank you.
Thank you.
And Alan, thank you for incredibly great conversation. And for the live attendees, thank you for sharing this space. And for those of you who are viewing us later,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you. You can find me at queerlycomplex.com. I am also Queerly Complex on all social media. That's QueerlyComplex. And I have a couple of virtual events coming up. I have one virtual event, an open studio on political clowns. I'm going to be sharing my latest work. And I have another in-person event coming up at the end of November with Headprint House and Crystal Mason. It is an open house for queer and trans artists to get connected to other queer and trans artists and consultants and fiscal sponsors and things of that nature. Everything's at queerlycomplex.com.
Oh, that's going to be great. That's going to be great. On that note, thank you. And I'm closing this month's Consent Dojo. Until next time, keep building your consent muscles.
Bye, y'all.